Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Surviving Life Today podcast, which isn't really a podcast. It's more of a blog journal or today a chat. But whatever we're doing here, what we're focusing on is how we're all surviving life today. Hi, welcome. I'm Kelly McFarland. I'm your host. I am an anthropologist, researcher, farmer, mother, educator, crafter, small business owner, and a baker. And I have a lot of ideas about how we're all surviving life and how we can all work together to craft a better future. So, welcome. It's good to see you, or good for you to see me. It's good to see me, as Glinda would say. So, today's episode is about race. This is a very pointed episode because I recently heard that a local college in Texas is no longer teaching courses on race or gender. And so in order to diffuse any beliefs that those courses might be in any way not okay, I thought it would be a good idea to just go ahead and record how I teach about race in class to show you that this isn't really a bad thing. This is actually a really good thing. And my hope is that at the end of this chat, you will have kind of a different understanding of how we can all view race, how race is socially constructed, and how we shouldn't be using this kind of a stereotype. Okay? So, first, before we get into race at all, we are going to talk a little bit about genetics. Okay, so not very exciting, but important to understand. So, first off, what I always ask my class is how many of you don't like the flavor of Brussels sprouts, kale, cabbage, right? Those kinds of a flavor. The taste buds on your tongue, right? Those are coated with chromosome number 7. These chromosomes on your tongue, right? That chromosome 7 designates your taste buds. Some people have a PTC receptor, okay, that detects the presence of PTC, phenyl thiocarbamide, okay? And if PTC is present, you taste a bitter flavor. So when you think about that, if genetically you have that on your chromosome, it makes you taste that flavor. So the same can be said for cilantro. Okay, so we're starting to get into genetics and we're starting to think about how we understand things. Another way you can think about genetics is physical traits. So that was a way that we experience something, right, with the gene coding the taste buds on our tongue. Another thing is like if your ears are connected, right? So you can see I'm not wearing earrings. My ears are not connected here at my head. That is a genetic trait. Some people's ears connect to their head right here. That is a genetic trait. So we're starting to think about in like kind of a larger sense how genetics impact both what we experience and also what we show. So thinking about that, how do we understand genetics in the terms of natural selection? So Darwin and Wallace came up with the theory of natural selection because they saw changes in how animals look based on their environment. Okay? So the best example of this that we use in class is peppered moths in British history. In British history, peppered moths are either like they show white or they show dark, right? So like it'll be predominantly a white moth or predominantly a dark, and I'll go ahead and put a picture here. Okay, so these peppered moths, before the Industrial Revolution, when birch trees, which were lining the streets in London, right? Those birch trees are white. So before the Industrial Revolution, there were more white peppered moths. During the Industrial Revolution, where there was coal being pumped into the skies and the coal dust fell onto the trees and made the birch trees look black, the black peppered moths were most of what you would see. You wouldn't see any white peppered moths. They figured out that was because the birds could see the white ones better on the black trees or the black ones better on the white trees. And so they were picked off, right? So in this case, the moths themselves did nothing. The moths just lived. But because of their environment changing, because of the trees going from having white bark to black bark, they were prevalent at different rates. Okay? So natural selection is how they are naturally selected to be the majority of the population, right? So white trees, the white moths, black trees, the black moths, okay? In the same token, we have for many generations used artificial selection, meaning it's not the environment, it's not something that we can't do anything about. It's you and me picking, okay? We as humans have picked dogs, right? A Chihuahua, a poodle, a beagle, all of these different dog types. What we see today is what we have created through selecting and breeding different phenotypes, right? Like different things that you see, okay? I should say that there are two experiments that I've seen in documentaries that are touching on this, which there was this one documentary where there was a scientist who was trying to see how long it would take to breed feral wolves into trainable dog type animals, right? Wolves aren't dogs. The ones that didn't bite him and didn't show aggression, he bred them. And basically he had wolf dogs, right, that he could keep. In the reverse of this, we have seen pigs that people keep on their farms that are domestic pigs. They have never been in the wild, and they will escape and go in the wild, and they will grow tusks, and they will become feral to protect themselves, okay? So we see in live time this type of selection happening, this type of, dare I say, evolution happening, okay? So we know that traits are types of adaptations. Sometimes traits are similar, like bugs developed wings, they think, in order to cool their bodies, but it also made them fly. Birds also have wings, right? But they're developed as adaptations for two different purposes, but they ended up being animals that look the same. Same things with fish and whales. They both swim in the ocean, right? But fish breathe through gills, and whales breathe through their air hole because of the different development that they have been on. Okay, so I'm just kind of trying to get it there that we know there's a lot of this that we do know. We know for a fact that this happens. It's not a theory. It is a fact. It is a fact that we have bred dogs to be what they are today. It is a fact. We have proven that. Okay. But for a long time, people didn't know how it worked. So now we'll get into a session of how does that work? So how does it work, right? How is it that I have ears that are not connected and some people have ears that are connected? How is it that I have a hitchhiker's thumb? How is it that I have brown eyes, right? And so when we were trying to figure out how it all works, for a long time, there were biologists and all of these different scientists who were grappling with the idea of the theory of natural selection who could not, like, they couldn't figure out genetics. And then on the other side, you have like the church who's trying to say, you know, like this is basically God or some divine intervention that is creating genetics. And then, interestingly enough, they discovered in the early 1900s that Gregor Mendel, who was a monk, I love the irony of this, in the late 1800s, who actually figured it all out. So I'll go ahead and explain Gregor Mendel's work. Fascinating to me, let me just kind of take a break there and stop and say it's fascinating to me that this is a battle between the church and the scientists. And in the end, it was somebody from the church who actually knew the truth, right? So this is to say, like, we can all grow, we can all learn, we can all develop different understandings based on science. Okay. It doesn't mean that you can't have your belief system. It just means that now we understand more of the world that we are experiencing around us. Okay. So, anyway, Gregor Mendel developed something called Punnett squares. And I don't know, it really depends on what high school you went to and who your science teacher is, whether or not you have learned about Punnett squares. I remember, I don't think I learned about them in high school. I think I learned about them in biology 1 in college. And I thought they were the most fun ever. And then my oldest, who is now in college, learned about them when she was in high school. So I don't know when they teach them. But Gregor Mendel used pea plants, like PEA, pea plants. And what he was trying to do is understand how you could take a white pea plant and a red pea plant and breed them together and get, first of all, 4 red pea plants. Second of all, right? So in the first generation, it was all red. But then in the next generation of plants, from the red one's seeds, he got a quarter of them white, right? And so they went from being half red, half white to all red in the next generation. And then in the next generation after that, all red with 1 white, right? So what happened there? And so he developed the idea of the Punnett square. The Punnett square takes into consideration that we have dominant and recessive traits. And 3 times out of 4, I'm going to do a little diagram here to show you, right? But in the first generation, right, let's say that you have a dominant trait and a recessive trait. The first generation, if it's all the dominant against all the recessive, the dominant traits will win, right? And so in this little slide that I'm going to put right here, you'll see that it's a red flower and a white flower, the first parent being red flowers, second parent being white flowers. All the dominant red flowers are the reason why it turns out red. You can see the little square, and because all of the dominant red is in all 4 squares, it's red, right? From that generation, you have dominant and recessive genes. So keep in mind that that first generation, they all had red petals that you could look at. But in their genes, they had recessive genes of white. And so if you take those first generation red flowers and you breed them with each other, you will have, out of 4 cases, 1 case that is 2 recessive genes, right? And this is just really the odds, right? Like the statistical results of the breeding. And so the reason that 1 in 4 is a white flower is because it is a double recessive. So there wasn't a dominant red to take the color, okay? And I'll go ahead and put another slide here that kind of shows that, and I invite you to pause and watch, okay? I know this is really long. I'm sorry. Anyway, so because of that, and because of Mendel's Punnett squares, we started to develop an understanding of how it could be that someone like me, who may have been born to everyone who had, like, let's say connected ears or straight thumbs, how I could have disconnected ears and a hitchhiker's thumb, right? If that's a recessive gene, then how do I have it? Or how could someone with blue eyes be born when both parents have brown eyes? Okay, so the blue eyes is a recessive gene, but if both parents have that recessive gene, then the likelihood is 1 in 4 will also have it, okay? And they'll have double recessive instead of a dominant and recessive. Because of double recessive, it makes it so that there's not a dominant one to take over, okay? So just following this with genes, we now have an understanding of how heredity happens, right? Like heredity for animals, that is the reason why you might have like these dogs that you have bred through artificial selection for all the dogs to be really large bull mastiffs. But then in the next generation, you have a runt in the litter, right? Why does that happen? Well, recessive genes. That's why that happens, okay? So on the next slide here, I'm going to give a little shout out to Rosalind Franklin because she is the original person who took this photo of a chromosome showing DNA, and Raymond Gosling stole it from her and gave it to Watson and Crick. And that is how the understanding of DNA was born. The double helix was born. Okay. So we know that genes are located in DNA, and that is how we have heredity. It is like a blueprint for building a human or another animal. Okay. A living being. Our genes are the blueprints for building a living being. With that, we have discovered with the double helix, there are different chemicals that pair together to create the double helix. With that, in the late 90s and early 2000s was the Human Genome Project. How many people out there remember the Human Genome Project? How many people remember living and learning about it? When I teach this in class, a lot of the times my students who have just graduated high school did not learn about the Human Genome Project in school. As a matter of fact, the only students I have known that have known about it are students that lived through hearing about it in the news. I actually do not know if the Human Genome Project is taught about in high school at all, which is fascinating to me because I went to school in the 90s, and it began in October 1990, and the project finished April 2003. So in all of that time is when the project was happening. And I didn't learn about DNA, but I did learn that the Human Genome Project was happening. Why did I learn that? You ready for this? Okay, so now we're going to talk about race, because scientists believed up until this point that there would be something in our DNA that designated race. Guess what, y'all? Nope. There is nothing. There is no gene. There is no chromosome that determines race. Nothing. Not one. Nope. In fact, this is so funny, y'all. According to a lot, right? But there is a podcast that I will link in the description called The Invention of Race. My favorite podcast to share with my students. And in this, there's like, humans are more similar than a flock of penguins, right? So humans are actually more similar than a flock of penguins across the board. We are actually... penguins have twice as many differences in their chromosomes than we do. Are you not shocked? This is my Roman Empire, y'all. Like, I love teaching about race. But I really, really love the fact that there's no difference. There is no such thing as race. It's a construct. It's a construct. It's a construct. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, so stop the presses. The Human Genome Project mapped our DNA. It figured out the blueprint for the human body. And there is no chromosome that says you are this race. Nothing. Okay? As a matter of fact, skin tone is determined by a variation of 2 or 3 different genes. It's called Polygeny. So it is the interaction of many genes to produce a single observable trait. So if you want to talk about skin tone, that is actually many genes that work together to create skin tone. And that is actually like, you have no idea. Okay, so I'm Puerto Rican, and my mother has 10 brothers and sisters. Actually 12, but the twins did not make it through childbirth. So when I was growing up, I have many aunts and uncles of many different shades. And I am fairly light. In the summer, I tan pretty dark. I never really thought about it until I started studying this. And then I will put up this slide, which shows you an array of people of different skin tones. So why are we all different colors? Right? Why are we all different colors then? If there's no such thing. Well, let's think about it. Okay. So let's use Africa because it's connected all the way up and all the way down. Okay. So let's say I took a plane and I was dropped off in the equator in the middle of Africa. Okay. I'm going to see from there a slow gradation of skin color from Africa to the North Pole or to the South Pole. Okay, like if I was going to walk, I probably wouldn't notice much of a difference at all in different skin colors. If everybody, like, let's say everybody lived where they not originally, because that's no such thing. Let's say everybody lived where they had migrated to up until the North Atlantic, whatever, right? And this is even not accounting for a lot of movement because people move and that's just what we do. But let's say everybody's in place, right? Just fantasy world it. And so I was dropped on the equator in Africa and I walked north. As I'm walking, the change in skin color is so slight that you don't even see it. It's so slight with the different, like a little bit further north, a little bit further north, right? That people go from really dark skin to a more tan, to a more pale, to just like, very white, right? What do you think? Maybe melanin, the presence of pigmentation, okay? The presence of pigmentation on your skin makes you less susceptible. Not maybe, yes. The presence of melanin on your skin makes you less susceptible to the sun's rays and less likely to get skin cancer, okay? That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Let me be very clear. That does not mean that it doesn't happen. But when someone who is very pale skinned burns a lot, those burns lead to oxidations within your gene, within your DNA representing, right? And that leads to skin cancer. So if your skin does not burn, you have less of a chance of those oxidations happening and a less chance of skin cancer. Okay, and so this is kind of funny because when I learned this, that's when I all of a sudden discovered that's what they mean by antioxidants. Oh my God, that's what they mean by antioxidants, right? So it's to help with that. Sorry, I always get off on these tangents. I am so sorry. Anyway, so, and then in the reverse side of things, okay, if you're living in the North Pole, you need as much vitamin D as your skin can absorb, because in the North Pole, it is dark for half the year, okay? And if you do not get enough vitamin D, your bones do not develop correctly and you can get rickets. Rickets is when your bones are weak and you actually can get bow-legged because your legs can't support your body, okay? So that was back in the day. Now we do have sunblock, right, for skin cancer and stuff like that. And we have vitamin D that you can take so that you don't get rickets, okay? But just thinking about why we might look different, okay? Think about the fact that if you were to be dropped in the equator and walk, okay, this actually experientially, through our own scientific testing, makes sense. It makes sense, okay? There's a lot of theories about why different cultures look different. It is not in any way that they are specially different, if that's even a word. It is because of the environment that they lived in and the prominence, okay? So like think back to the peppered moths, okay? This is a scientific explanation. And obviously, if we discover something different tomorrow, then the scientific explanation will change to incorporate that, which is why the scientific explanation now, what we know and what we teach, is based on what we discovered in the Human Genome Project. Because we know for fact, because we ran the blueprint, that there's no such thing as different races. Humans are 99.9% similar. And if you look into archaeological history, you'll see that Homo sapiens were actually on the planet with a lot of other human-type organisms. And modern Homo sapiens are the ones who kind of lived through that, right? And so I'm not going to get off on a tangent with that, but that's just to say, like, these are things that we know. This is not a theory. This has been proven. Okay. Back in the day, the Homo sapiens skeletons and stuff like that, that's based on theory because no one was alive back then to show another form of proof. Okay. So you need to start thinking, like, when people are using words like the theory of evolution, it's talking about way back when and all of those things that we have found because we were not there to observe. Okay. When we talk about evolution today and DNA and all of those things, we do know that. And also, you shouldn't be resistant to it because a lot of the time when they're testing our DNA, it is to help us to be more chances of procreating and carrying on forever, right? Like that's the whole goal of life, is to procreate and continue. So for instance, if you were going to get DNA testing with your potential spouse to see if you carry any kind of a recessive gene that might be bad, that's where that comes from. And I could get into a whole thing about genetic testing. I'm not going to record it. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But just so you know, based on environment, like sometimes when you're being tested for certain genes, there's a good side to that idea as well. Anyway, so originally we all had brown eyes until 6,000 or 10,000 years ago, right? So like they've clocked in our DNA, this is when the change happened for blue eyes. They think that blue eyes, they're not really sure where they came from. They think it might be the same as light skin. It might be that blue eyes have a better time of seeing across ice or something. Like I've heard a lot of theories, but not too sure about that. And then drinking milk. So drinking fresh milk from a cow past the age of 2 without lactose intolerance is actually a mutation. Originally, none of us could do that because nobody did do that. But in the colder climates where you can milk a cow and you can save the milk in the cold and you can drink it past that age, it makes sense because there's a lot of protein and healthy things in milk for you to be able to live, to survive, to procreate. Okay. So being lactose tolerant in colder climates is more chance of survival. It creates more chance of survival. Okay. So now when we think about genetics, what we really want to think about is the reason for that is a better chance of survival. Okay. So that leads us to the question of, if race is just totally pretend, right? Like we found out, Human Genome Project, there's no such thing. So where did this idea come from? So the construction of race is a colonial construction, okay, in order to give ourselves permission to do some really heinous crap. Okay, and so I've had actually a lot of students that get stuck on this. And they're just like, but if it's made up, why? Why? Well, take a look around at everything that is not just and how things are constructed around it to give people permission to do things that are not just. Okay? So a lot of time, people who knowingly do things that are wrong will create an idea that makes it okay for them to do it. And so, if we look at the creation of race, There was an idea in religion that was called the great chain of being. And also, as an anthropologist, I should really say that anthropologists did play a hand in creating the idea of race. As a matter of fact, it was an anthropologist, Linnaeus, that made this idea. And largely back in the colonial era, anthropologists were like infiltrators to other cultures who learned about other cultures in order for colonial entities to take those cultures over. And because of that, I feel that it is my duty as an anthropologist to teach that we have gone past this idea and that this is not correct. And anthropologists need to stand up and teach the truth because we taught the lie. Okay. So as science develops and we change our understanding, we all need to take a step forward and we need to say, yes, there were mistakes, but as we learn better, we do better, baby. And so anthropologists know better now, and so they should be doing better. And so I guess that's kind of a call out that I didn't mean to. Race is a construct. And so from religion, we did have that idea of the great chain of being. So the great chain of being was made to kind of explain that like man is next to God. Okay. But it did not differentiate between who man was at that time. Anthropology did play a big role in the spread of the idea of race. And evolutionary anthropologists really tried hard scientifically to show race linked to the development of civilization and to like create this huge argument that we're all like headed towards 1500s London, you know, which if we had more cultural diffusion back in the day and if we had other voices of power in the generation of things like laws and the Constitution and different places that have been built since then, maybe we'd be living in a much different world today. So I do need to say that. But evolutionary anthropologists really used these same tactics for developing their theory as a way for the colonizers to kind of take over the world. And we do take a stance today against racial injustice. And we do educate about this construction of race in history. And we work to generate an understanding of the social construction of race and its consequences. So if you want to know why I'm making this video, that's why. Okay. So once the idea of race was created, then it was used to explain and divide, and it was used to create hierarchy. Eugenics became prominent because of that. Racial purity is kind of a joke because it's not real, but that idea of artificial selection is what I always think of when I think of eugenics, is humans selecting themselves like they're little poodles to everybody look like a poodle. And if you know anything about purebred animals, you know that they have a lot of problems with genetic defects and disease and all of those other things. So as a scientist and as someone who thinks about this scientifically, when I'm thinking about race and purity in races, the truth is that race doesn't exist. Like, let's kind of be real there. But the truth is that if you diversify genetics, you have a greater chance of survival because you are now making it so that those recessive genes are much, much less likely and the dominant genes are much more likely. Okay, so sorry about you. Anyway, but these racial purification and eugenics, which unfortunately we're seeing arising again in America from uneducated people in control. These were prominent in Nazi propaganda, but the Nazi propaganda actually came from American scientists, American race scientists. And let me also say that on top of enslaving people and on top of Jim Crow, there was also sterilization of people in Puerto Rico. There was, the outlawing interracial marriage. There's Native Americans have just been like, I could teach an entire thing on that, but how horribly Native Americans have been treated, and not only Native Americans treatment, but the trashing of history and all of that. When the United States originally was discovered, okay, when people from Europe originally in the early 1500s, 1493, came to the United States from Europe, in order to take the land, they did not have this construct of race. What they did instead was the Inter-Caetera Papal Bull. History 101, y'all. I'm sorry. So I'm going to go off on a historical tangent. Please fast forward past this if you don't want to watch it. But I'm going to kind of talk about like how did it lead to the enslavement of people, right? So you have probably learned a lot about the discovery of the United States, right? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. 1493, the Inter-Caetera Papal Bull was issued by Pope Alexander VI. The Inter-Caetera Papal Bull said that if you are holy and you believe in the Christian God, then you can keep your land. But if not, you can't. Okay, so that was the start of kind of manifest destiny, low-key. Okay, so because of settler colonialism and manifest destiny, there was this idea of right to land. The Spaniards believed that there was gold. And so there were many expeditions by many Spaniards to go and find the lost cities of gold. Once they got to the point where they could not find the lost cities of gold, they needed to do something to compensate for the fact that they had taken out huge loans, basically, from the kings and queens in Europe to come here and find gold. And so, Sweetness and Power by Sydney Mintz, you can read that, and that kind of talks about a lot of this. And so does Stuffed and Starved. I think I have that one. Yeah, there. Stuffed and Starved, and I guess I'll just grab them for you. So these are two books that talk a lot about this. Sweetness and Power by Sydney Mintz and Stuffed and Starved by Raj Patel. Stuffed and Starved is a great book. Let me just say that one was a book I couldn't put down when I first read it. But these books talk a lot about how we got here, okay? And so it was the development of sugar and the discovery of sugar that led to, well, that, tobacco, coffee, those things led to wanting to farm this vast amount of land in order to make huge profits so that they could get out of the debt that they had incurred from going on these gold expeditions. Okay, so the original point was to recompense what they had lost. Through however long of trying to grow sugar, which sugarcane production was extremely intensive, so many people died just growing sugar and processing sugar, and it's really a sad thing because sugar was then used to get the proletariat in Europe to not need as much food, because we could take sugar and we can put it in cardboard and you'll find it tasty and it'll fill your belly, but it's not nutritious. Okay, so this is the beginning of really like a huge change in how the people in power could get those below them fooled into the system. Okay, coffee and tobacco are very much the same. You can drink a cup of coffee and not know that you're hungry. You can smoke a cigarette and keep working. Okay, and so the Industrial Revolution, all of these are it's all 1, 2, 3, and it's from thinking they were going to get gold, they didn't get gold, and so then they needed something else. They found profit in sugar and in coffee and in tea. So much profit, in fact, that it led to the French Revolution and it led to capitalism. Okay, so because all of these middlemen, these merchants, were all of a sudden making so much money, right? There became a different form. And then the French Revolution was heavily based on not just this starvation, let them eat cake, sugar, hello, right? Let them eat cake. But this realization that if these merchants were getting so rich, what the heck is going on? And it's no longer a king and queen ruling. It is now like we have the option of going for what we want to go for in order to make money, in order to rule ourselves. Okay. So the birth of all of this comes from, wanting gold. I always talk about how invention leads to all the fallout. Like, if we look around today, AI is very much behind a lot of fallout. Anyway, back to the past. So, this racialization, it was not just about settler colonialism and manifest destiny. It also led to broken treaties, which we're seeing through today. In the early 1900s, it was illegal for Native American people to practice religion. It was illegal for them to wear their traditional clothing. Children were taken forcibly and put into boarding schools. Children's hair was cut in order to be put into these boarding schools, which culturally, young men did not cut their hair until their father passed away. So this is a huge, cultural link, a cultural tradition that was broken. So all of this happened, and a lot of people at the time were believing in this idea of race until Franz Boas was the father of American anthropology. And he became an anthropologist through being a cartographer in Alaska. And so he went to Alaska to draw a map of how to go from the south point of Alaska up to the Bering Strait or something. I don't even know what. But what he found was the only way that he could draw a map or know where to go was by asking the Alaskan Inuit people who lived there. And they could tell you based on the season, the snow, and what you saw, the pathway to get there, right? And so this develops into the theory of traditional ecological knowledge, which means that generations and generations were passing down this knowledge of how to navigate the area. And so if you're at the spring melt, that there will be a lake there, and there's going to be another lake over here, and you're going to have to pass through the middle. But if you're not at the spring melt, you're going to see solid masses of land, and you don't need any more direction, right? So just think about ideas like that. These were passed down by people. And so all of a sudden, it's kind of like this idea that there is a lot of knowledge here that we are completely freaking missing because of this invention of an idea of hierarchy that is incorrect. Okay, so don't just think about the idea of different groups that have been developed, but think about the idea of how we all together can work together to invent innovative and awesome things in the future. Okay. And when you create this idea of race, where you are dividing different groups from talking to each other, you are making that not happen. You are making it so we cannot work together to innovate. You are making it so that inventions cannot be, oh, I saw this guy over here doing this. What if we did this? Okay. And so I think Franz Boas saw it. I see it. So in the construction of race, what you see is a need for these different powerful entities to fix the situation that they have made. And in order to do that, they take advantage of other people and do heinous things to them in order for them to get themselves out of trouble. And I do want to say that this is oddly similar to things that we see today. Okay? But that's about as far as I'm going to go into that link with the construction of race. I will say that constructing problems for the people who are down, not in the powerful situation as the people in power, creating situations where they fight with each other instead of search for more power makes it so the people who are in power can maintain control. Okay, so race is very much a part of that. So going back to the United States history, in our history, I'll put up a slide here with the U.S. Census from 1870, 1950, and 2020. And you'll see the different categories of people listed there. And as you can see, we have really gone through a lot of different iterations of which races we talk about. So I will say in other places, there's a lot of, I mean, there in China, there's 56 distinct cultural groups. So this is how the United States has used race, right? And so the census today, it just asks if you're of Hispanic and Latino origin. But then Hispanic is not a separate race. It falls under one of these other categories. Okay. It's really interesting because when you start crunching the numbers, if the Hispanic population is counted as a part of the numbers, then we are a minority majority nation. There are more minority groups than there is a majority white group. But if Hispanic fits as just a little subsection, and then you have white, black, what are the other? Chinese, American Indian, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Asian Indian, Vietnamese, other Asian, Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro, other Pacific Islander, and some other race, right? Those are your options. No Latino. Okay, so in that situation, we are a majority white nation. Look at what's happening right now in the public. Who is being targeted in our nation? Okay, so this is something that we really like. Sometimes you've got to sit back and think about these people in power. What is the angle? Interestingly enough, Middle Eastern and Northern Africa, NAME, I think that's going to be a category on the next census, or it's supposed to be. So Northern Africa and Middle Eastern will be its own race now, which we just pulled out of thin air. Okay? In the end, I think this is why race is not allowed to be taught at Texas A&M any longer, and I think this is why they don't want us to talk about it. And that's because of critical race theory. So critical race theory is actually an old concept. Oldie. It's from 40 years ago. The central concepts of critical race theory is race is a social construct, which it is, which we know definitively, not as a theory, but in proof that race is a social construct. There is no truth behind it. Watch the rest of my video if you'd like to know why. Racism is not only a product of individual bias or prejudice, but it's a lived hierarchy of access, right? So a lot of people like me who talk about structural racism, we're not talking about like that's how these people act towards each other and stuff like that. What we're talking about is the prevalence of news stories that speak negatively of minority groups only and speak positively of majority groups only, right? And so a good one is Latinos in baseball. And so there is actually, I do not remember even what it was called, but there's this article that an anthropologist wrote about the World Series in baseball and how it was mainly Latinos. I guess they were majority on the team. And in the news coverage, you only ever heard about the white players. And as a matter of fact, the Latinos would outperform the white players, but in coverage, you would only hear about like this white player hit a home run, right? And so the way that we speak about other cultures definitely leads to how people see them. Okay, so if all of the news stories are negative about a certain culture and positive about a different culture, then socially we will view them, we as like the queens, we, I guess, but socially people will view them as that, as what the news story is. And so it does very much, not only does it matter to see yourself out there, like it matters to see someone who looks like you so that you know you can one day achieve that, but it also matters in the terms of like, if you always see negative things about the people around you, it can lead to feeling hopeless. Like it doesn't lead to you doing bad things, it leads to feeling hopeless. And so, you know, those kinds of situations, not only does it make outsider groups look down upon you, but it can also be like, I mean, honestly, these people could be the next Einstein. who knows? These could be the next people that change the world. And because of news stories making them always look negative. And so that one hits me kind of hard. Anyway, racism is also embedded in legal systems and policies. The Virginia codes is, I think Kendi talks a lot in how to be an anti-racist about this. The matriarchal lineage. So in the Virginia codes, up until that point in time, we had looked at only patriarchal lineage, which meant that if a father had sons in the US, in US European tradition, okay, if a father had sons, the land went to the sons. If a father had a child, that child was determined to be the father's child. It did matter who the woman was, if it was his wife or not. But the woman, like, it became that father's child, right? But then in the Virginia codes, in enslavement, they changed that to make matriarchal lineage. And what happened with that was that if a black woman had a child, that child was determined as black. What that made happen was that all of Thomas Jefferson's children that he had with Sally Heming were enslaved. Thomas Jefferson enslaved his own children. Okay. So when we look at racism being embedded into legal systems, this is like a harsh reality in the past and in the present. So when you think about all of these things, when you think about being colorblind or that idea that like, I don't see race, that actually isn't a good thing, because you do need to see the history of how these different groups have been treated differently and how that makes them feel today. And I get it if you don't care about feelings. I care about innovation, and I want them to feel good so that they'll work with other groups and we can innovate and make an awesome world for all of us to live in. Let's craft a better future. Okay, that is my whole purpose. Changes in law and history in the US, right? So our needs in the US has led to the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was largely aided by Chinese Americans or Chinese people, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay, Japanese American internment camps versus Japanese American soldiers who are actively fighting in that same war. Like this guy, guys. Bracero program versus DACA versus border politics today, which I don't even want to talk about, but how many times can we screw people over in different ways? Same with the history of Black Americans in the United States. I mean, it's anyway, more prevalent examples. Redlining, denying bank loans for right? So denying of bank loans, actually in the civil rights era in the 1960s, if you are included in a civil rights group, banks denied you loans. Underfunding Black and Latino school districts. How about agriculture? Who owns the farm and who works on the farm? What about agriculture in the terms of loss of food sovereignty? Loss of communities around food, okay? Police violence, incarceration rates, college graduation rates, okay? All of these are a part of like that critical race theory of how these past laws, okay, came to inform us today. And so when we think about race and we think about everything that we're seeing around us today, a lot of the time people like me who have learned about all of these things are actually amazed that it's the same tricks. It's always the same tricks. It's always the same debunked argument that has already been proven wrong. Okay? So what are takeaways here? Race is a social construct. There's no evidence of different races in any of our biology. Okay? And through time, those in power have used these types of devices to alienate us from each other in order to maintain control. Okay? So if you want to buy into racism, if you want to buy into the horrible treatment of other people just based on a stereotype, then you're buying into allowing those in power to control you. Because they know the Human Genome Project debunked it completely. They know race is a social construct. They know all of this history. And if they don't, they can just watch my video. Anyway, so hopefully this wasn't too meandering of a talk about race, but I think I have taught it in kind of the way I teach it in class. In class, I have a lot of questions and we have a lot of back and forth to clarify anything that I said that didn't make sense. I prefer, as an anthropologist, to teach things holistically. So I teach the science side of it, and then I also teach the social side of it. And in all of it, we can see that this construct, it really helps those in power maintain control. So let me know what you think. If you have any questions, please put them in the description or put them in the questions below. Thank you for all those who hung out until the very end. Like, hype, subscribe, do what you will. Ask any questions below if you'd like a follow-up video to kind of explore different areas of things that I spoke about in this video. I can't promise that I will be able to know too much, but I can read some articles and share with you what I learn. I will include links to everything that I mentioned in this video in the description below. And I think that is everything. So until next time, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you survive and thrive in all that you do. Take care.